You're listening to The Story, the widow who defied a town to protect a fugitive and found love on the prairie. Asterisk, asterisk, settle in and let the wind-swept plains of the Wild West carry you into a tale of quiet courage, second chances, and a love that bloomed where no one thought it could. The Kansas plains stretched endlessly, a land of quiet winds and quiet people. In the fall of 1883, Eleanor Vance lived alone on her small ranch, a solitary figure in a world that had grown too large after her husband, Arthur, died. Cana fever had swept through the territory 3 years prior, taking him and leaving her with an empty bed, and aching heart, and a silence that pressed on her like a heavy quilt. She had been only 28 when he passed, but the years of loneliness had carved lines into her face, each one a memory of work done alone and nights spent talking to no one but the wind. Her home was a modest cabin, a tilting barn, a few cattle, and a chicken coop, but it was all hers, and she kept it alive with grit and routine. Each day began before dawn. Feed the animals, repair fences, cook simple meals. And at night, she'd sit by the fire, Arthur's old flannel wrapped around her shoulders like a ghost she couldn't let go. Her only company was the wind, whispering secrets she never wanted to hear. On one such day, the sky began to shift in that unsettling way it does just before a storm. The horizon, which had been a clear, pale blue, turned a bruised purple. Scent of rain drifted through the air, and thunder rumbled in the distance like a warning. Eleanor moved quickly, her instincts sharpened by years of facing weather alone. She secured the barn, tossed hay into the corral, and gathered the chickens into their coop. She was wiping sweat from her brow when she saw it, just a flicker at first, shadow against the swelling storm. A man on horseback. He wasn't riding properly. He was slumped forward, his horse jerking and twisting beneath him, clearly spooked by the wind. As he drew closer, she could see he wasn't just exhausted, he was injured. Blood soaked one side of his shirt, turning the fabric a dark, wet red. Her first instinct was to run inside, lock the door, and let the stranger pass. This land didn't always attract good people. Some were desperate, some were dangerous, but then she remembered Arthur. What would he have done? She grabbed a lantern and a blanket and stepped out into the wind. The rider barely stayed upright long enough for her to catch his reins. "You're hurt," she murmured, already trying to steady him. He didn't answer. His head lolled forward. She saw now it was a bullet wound. Fear clawed at her chest. Who had shot him? Was someone after him? Was she bringing danger to her doorstep? But she couldn't leave him. With effort, she half-dragged, half-carried him off the saddle and into the barn, laying him on the straw floor. She slammed the door behind them, shutting out the howling wind. For a moment, everything was quiet except the ragged sound of his breathing. Eleanor didn't have much in the way of medical supplies, but what she did have, Arthur had taught her to use: carbolic acid, bandages, boiled water. It wasn't pretty, but it was enough. She cleaned the wound and pressed gauze into it, whispering reassurances more for herself than the stranger. He remained unconscious, a ghost of a man, his skin pale beneath the grime. Later that night, as the storm raged outside, she sat on a bale of hay, wrapped in her shawl, watching him. The fire in the lantern flickered, casting uneven shadows on the barn walls. Who was he? Why was he running? Would trouble follow? Still, there was something about the way he had looked, something vulnerable. She couldn't explain it, but she hadn't felt anything beyond her grief in so long. Now, there was this strange stirring inside her, mixed with fear and compassion. She dozed off for a while, head resting against a support beam. At dawn, she woke to a surprising sound of voice. "Thank you." She looked over. He was awake, his blue eyes sharp and filled with confusion and pain. "You're lucky," she said softly. Storm nearly finished what that bullet started. He winced. Didn't think I'd wake up at all. You've lost blood. You shouldn't move. He studied her face for a long moment, then finally said, Name's Jasper Shaw. She hesitated before replying. Eleanor Vance. Tay said nothing else for a while. The storm had passed, but a new kind of tension remained in the air. His presence wasn't just a physical way too, was emotional too. The boundaries she had built over 3 years of grief were beginning to bend, tested by this wounded man with a past she didn't yet understand. He wasn't dressed like a drifter. His coat, though torn, had once been fine. There was a leather satchel tied to his saddle, but his horse had long bolted into the storm. She returned to the house to fetch more supplies, food, water, and a blanket. When she came back, he was trying to sit up, but failing. You shouldn't, she said sharply. You shouldn't have helped me, he replied. I know. They shared another silence. She dragged him to a softer spot near the haystack, covering him with the blanket. He didn't resist. For a woman who hadn't touched another soul in years, she was surprised how quickly she fell into the rhythm of caring for him. It felt natural, familiar, dangerous. She didn't know yet what would come of this man. But something inside her told her that her life, her long, still life, had just changed forever. The days that followed unfolded with cautious slowness. Jasper remained in the barn, too weak to walk far, but determined not to be idle. Eleanor brought him meals, simple stews, cornbread, and boiled eggs, and each time, their silences grew a little shorter. His recovery was slow. The wound had gone deep, tearing through muscle, narrowly missing anything vital. Well, Eleanor's care, along with his own stubborn will to live, kept him from fever or worse. They spoke in fragments. She asked no questions about his past, and he offered no lies. What he did share, in pieces, made her more curious than cautious. He was a man running, but not from the law, he insisted. From trouble. Trouble that found him more often than he found it. I don't belong anywhere, he said one morning, sitting propped up against a beam, steam rising from the cup of coffee she'd placed in his hands. Neither do I, she replied. Jasper's presence began to shift the energy of the place. Eleanor had spent so long alone that the sound of another set of footsteps startled her at first. But soon, she found herself listening for them. When he was strong enough to stand, he began helping with small tasks, scooping feed, hammering loose boards, even patching the coop roof. He moved slowly, grimacing with each stretch of his healing shoulder, but he worked with focus. Eleanor found herself watching from the corner of her eye more than she liked to admit. Insight. It wasn't romance, not yet, but something deeper was forming. Trust, recognition, the unspoken comfort that comes from laboring side by side, without the burden of explaining oneself. That evening, as the sky bled orange and gold, Jasper surprised her by carrying a sack of grain to the feed trough. She protested at first, still wary of his condition, but he waved her off. Can't just sit around and watch you do it all, he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. You're not strong enough. Maybe not, but I'll get there. And he did. The barn, once a place of stillness and ghosts, began to feel lived in again, alive. Over time, Eleanor started talking, not about Arthur at first. That pain still sat too close to the surface, but she spoke of the ranch, how the fencing always needed mending, how the creek ran dry some summers, how Harmony Creek was a town full of small minds with even smaller hearts. Jasper listened. He was good at it. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix her. He simply nodded when she spoke, his clear eyes steady and unreadable. One afternoon, they sat on the porch after finishing chores. The wind was calm for once, a gentle hush moving through the grass. My husband, she said at last, voice low, died of fever 3 years ago. She expected awkwardness, maybe even pity. but Jasper only nodded again. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "No need," she replied. "It just still hurts, that's all." He looked out across the prairie. Some hurts never go away. You just learn to live beside them. Lena turned her head, studying his profile in the fading light. There was sorrow in him. Not loud, not dramatic, just embedded in the way he carried himself. "You've lost someone too," she said quietly. He didn't answer, but the silence that followed was heavy with agreement. That night, the wind returned, rattling the windows of the cabin as if reminding them the world was still wild and uncertain. Eleanor sat by the fire, mending a tear in her only good dress, while Jasper whittled a piece of wood into something vaguely horse-shaped. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly. "Where would I go?" She didn't have an answer. Neither did he. Real life parallel. There's something profoundly human about two people, both carrying burdens, finding unexpected companionship through shared labor. In real pioneer history, many such partnerships formed not from love at first sight, but from mutual survival. Days turned to weeks. The ranch, once burdened by Eleanor alone, now seemed to breathe easier under two sets of hands. Jasper's strength returned steadily. He fixed the sticking latch on the chicken coop, rehung the cabin door that had sagged on its hinges for a year, and even dug a new channel to redirect runoff from the barn. He worked with the kind of quiet focus Arthur used to have, and that scared Eleanor a little. One day, without meaning to, she asked, "Why were you really shot?" He didn't answer right away. He kept sharpening the small blade he was using to carve. "Bar fight," he said eventually. "Didn't start it, but I ended it." "You kill a man?" "No, but the man who did got away. I was the one who stayed behind. They thought I was part of it. Couldn't wait around to prove otherwise." She nodded. It was a story too simple to be a lie, yet complicated enough to feel true. "I've never killed anyone," he added, more to the fire than to her, "but I've been chased like one." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Shared understanding of being misjudged, of being trapped by circumstances not entirely their own making. That evening, they sat on the porch again. Eleanor brought out 2 cups of coffee, the sky above them a tapestry of stars. "You could stay?" she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could weigh them. Jasper turned his head slowly. "Stay here, on the ranch. It's too much for one person. And the quiet." She hesitated. "It's not as comfortable as it used to be." He didn't reply, not right away. Instead, he looked out at the prairie, then at her. "You sure?" "I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't." Was the night everything changed? For a brief time, life settled into a quiet rhythm on the ranch, different from before, but familiar in its own way. Eleanor and Jasper worked side by side. They spoke in low voices, shared meals, and slept under the same roof, though on opposite sides of the cabin. There was a stillness to it all, but not the painful kind Eleanor had known after Arthur's death. This stillness was warm, safe. Jasper repaired the sagging roof before the winter snow came, and Eleanor taught him how to milk the goat without getting kicked. He was competent, thoughtful, and respectful of her space. That, more than anything, kept her heart from running. But not everyone viewed this new arrangement so kindly. Harmony Creek was small. It's too small to keep secrets. It wasn't long before the rumors began. The man with the bullet wound, the widow letting him stay. The whispers grew like thorns, subtle at first, then cruel. Some claimed he was an outlaw. Others swore they saw his face on a wanted poster once. The truth didn't matter. The narrative had already taken root. And at the center of that storm stood Caleb McBride. Caleb wasn't elected to anything. He didn't wear a badge. But in Harmony Creek, his voice was law. He owned the general store, ran the post, and made himself the town's moral compass. which meant, in his mind, he had every right to know who was sleeping at Eleanor Vance's ranch. One afternoon, Eleanor saw them coming, 3 men on horseback, riding up the trail toward her land. Caleb led, wearing that smug expression that always seemed too tight for his face. Behind him were 2 others, Jeremiah, a sheep farmer who barely made eye contact, and Henry, a blacksmith's apprentice with guilt in his eyes. Eleanor stiffened at the sight. Jasper, stacking firewood behind the barn, saw them too. He wiped his hands on a rag and moved beside her, standing tall and calm. Caleb pulled the reins and stopped just short of her porch. "Eleanor," he said, his voice too loud. "In the open air. We need a word." Kay didn't answer, didn't invite them down. Caleb didn't wait for permission. "Word around town says you've taken in a man," he continued. "Okay, man with a bullet hole. Man no one knows." Eleanor folded her arms. "I didn't realize I owed you an explanation." "You don't owe me," Caleb said, the smile fading from his lips. "You owe the town. We all look out for each other. Always have, always will." "She's not part of the town anymore," Jasper said quietly. "Not really. You made sure of that?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You got a name, stranger?" "Jasper." "Shaw. Where you from?" "No word that concerns you, okay?" That set something off in Caleb. He stepped forward, his voice hardening. "You think you can hide out here, pretending you're just a helping hand? You're a man with a gunshot and no explanation. That makes you a threat. And it's her responsibility to turn you in." Eleanor stepped forward now, her voice like steel. "It's my land, Caleb. My choice. He's done no harm here. He's helped more in 2 weeks than half the men in Harmony Creek have in a year. He's taken advantage of your grief, Eleanor." Caleb snapped. "That's what people are saying." That a lonely widow opened her door to the first pair of boots that showed up. The words hit harder than she expected, but she didn't flinch. "You don't get to decide who I trust," she said. "Arthur's been gone 3 years. I want to offer someone shelter. That's my right." The 2 men behind Caleb shifted, uncomfortably, as if regretting the ride entirely. Caleb, sensing the conversation slipping from his control, leaned forward in his saddle. "You're making a mistake. Harboring a man like that, someone with a past trouble, will follow him, and it'll find you too." He pulled the reins, turning his horse sharply. The others followed. Before riding off, Caleb called over his shoulder, "You've been warned." Moments like these highlight just how dangerous small-town righteousness can be. It's never about safety. It's about control, about forcing people, especially women, to conform to a story they never agreed to be part of. After they left, Eleanor trembled. Not from fear, but from rage. "They'll come back," Jasper said softly. "Let them," she replied, her voice firm. "I'm not afraid of shadows anymore." That night, they didn't talk much. The fire crackled, and the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls. Eleanor sat by the hearth, stitching a tear in her shawl, while Jasper sharpened his blade. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes, I did." "Why?" She looked up, eyes locking with his. "'Cause you needed it. And because I've lived too long in silence. It's time someone stood up for something real." He stepped closer, hesitated, then rested a hand gently on her shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her like that, softly, deliberately, with meaning. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She leaned into his hand, letting the warmth of it settle the fire inside her that night. As they lay in their separate beds, the space between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge. Something had changed. Not all at once, but enough that Eleanor knew what the town thought of her. But for the first time, she didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She had made her choice, and she would stand by it. The first snow arrived quietly. just a light dusting at dawn, softening the hard lines of the prairie and painting the world in a fragile white. Eleanor stood on the porch with a cup of coffee in her hands, watching flakes spiral lazily to the ground. Inside the cabin, Jasper tended the fire, his presence no longer that of a guest, but of someone who belonged. They had fallen into an unspoken routine. Together, they cleared snow from the barn roof, chopped firewood, and rationed food with care. The days were short, the nights long, and in the warmth of the cabin, something subtle began to bloom between them, something neither of them dared name aloud. In the quiet moments, they talked, really talked. Jasper told her about the night of the bar fight, how a misunderstanding turned violent, how he'd stepped in to defend someone and ended up being blamed when the blood settled. He hadn't killed anyone, he said, but the law didn't see it that way. Rather than wait for judgment, he had run. It was cowardly, he admitted one night, staring into the fire. But it was also survival. Eleanor didn't judge. Her grief had taught her that life rarely offered clean decisions. Sometimes, she said softly, running is the only way forward. She opened up to more than she had in years. She spoke of Arthur, how he'd dreamed of turning the land into a proper ranch, how they used to sit under the cottonwood tree and plan a future that never came. She spoke of the silence that followed, his death, and how it had filled every corner of her world. Jasper didn't speak when she cried. He didn't try to fix the pain. He simply sat beside her, letting the fire warm them both. There's a kind of healing that comes not from words, but from presence. It's easy to write off connection as romance, but sometimes it's just about not having to carry the weight of your past alone anymore. As winter deepened, it became something like partners, not just in chores, but in the way they moved around each other. Eleanor would lift the water bucket just as Jasper was reaching for it. He would hand her a nail before she realized she needed one. It was a dance built on rhythm, trust, and quiet understanding. One night, as the wind howled outside, Eleanor shivered despite the fire. Cold? Jasper asked, looking up from his whittling. No, just the wind, she said. It sounds lonelier tonight. He stood, crossed the cabin, and opened the wooden chest at the foot of his bed. Pulling out an extra quilt, he draped it gently over her shoulders, then sat beside her without a word. She looked at him, feeling the closeness in her chest like the swell of a storm. It hasn't felt like this in a long time, she whispered. Like what? Like I'm not alone. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. In the days that followed, the snow came down harder. They were snowed in for nearly a week, the cabin reduced to a tiny world of warmth and flickering lantern light. They rationed beans and bread, played quiet games of checkers, and told stories from their childhoods. It was during that blizzard that Eleanor finally confessed her greatest fear, not the town's judgment, not the loneliness, but the feeling that she would never be truly seen again. Jasper listened, then took her hand in his. I see you, he said simply, and I'm not looking away. They shared their first kiss that night. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was soft, earnest, healing. Outside, the wind raged. Inside, they sat wrapped in each other's warmth, letting the years of pain melt slowly into something else. In many real frontier communities, isolation was as much a danger as illness or wolves. Widows often formed bonds with travelers or neighbors, not just for survival, but because the ache of being unseen was unbearable. This story echoes that reality. It's the need to be known as more than just a name on a gravestone. When the snow finally melted and spring hesitantly returned, so did the rest of the world. The prairie greened, birds returned, and the creek ran fuller than it had in years. Eleanor and Jasper resumed work outside, fixing the irrigation ditch, planting beans, and preparing for the next season. But even as the land softened, something hard approached from the west. One afternoon, they saw the rider. He approached slowly, not like a neighbor, but like a man with business. Jasper went still the moment he spotted him. Eleanor watched his jaw tighten. "Who is it?" she asked. "Could be someone from before," he said, eyes fixed on the approaching horseman. "Could be trouble." The rider didn't dismount. He studied the ranch, his eyes scanning everything before landing on Jasper. "Shaw," he called out flatly. "Didn't think I'd find you out here." Jasper stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Eleanor and the man. "You did? Now what?" "The past has a long memory," the rider said. "Some folks think justice wasn't done." "This isn't the place," Jasper said. "Not here. Not now." The rider's eyes flicked to Eleanor. "Didn't think you'd be hiding behind a woman." "I'm not hiding," Jasper growled. "She gave me shelter. That's all. That's enough," the rider snapped. His hand moved to his gun. Eleanor stepped forward. "You're on my land," she said firmly. "He's under my protection. If you have a problem, take it somewhere else." The rider hesitated. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from a widow with fire in her voice. "This ain't over," he muttered, backing away. "No," Eleanor replied, "but it ends here, today." He turned and rode off. As the dust settled, Jasper turned to her, his expression raw. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," she said. "I did." He stepped closer, rested a calloused hand against her cheek. "I don't deserve this," he said. "No," she said softly. "But you do need it. And so do I." The spring winds were softer now, no longer carrying the bite of winter, but the scent of blooming prairie flowers and thawed earth. The grass returned, green and full, and the creek babbled again, cutting a fresh path through the ranch that had almost forgotten the sound of water. Life resumed with a new rhythm. Jasper stayed, not just in name or in passing, but fully. He belonged here now, not as a fugitive or a guest, but as Eleanor's equal. They worked from sunrise to sunset, splitting chores without speaking much of it. She managed the livestock and kept the books. He built a new fence, patched the well, and turned the spare room into a proper tool shed. The past still lingered, but it didn't rule them. Sometimes, at night, Eleanor would catch him staring into the distance, his brow furrowed, eyes far away. "Do you regret staying?" she asked him once. He looked at her then, truly looked, and said, "No, this is the first place that's ever felt like mine." They didn't speak of love, not directly. Theirs was a love of action, of presence. He never missed a day helping her, never asked for more than a hot meal and a cup of coffee. And she, who had once cried alone in the dark, now woke each day to the sound of footsteps beside hers, boots tracking dust and life across the floor. In the real stories of the American frontier, love wasn't often grand or poetic. It was quiet, built in the spaces between hardship and duty. A look, a shared cup, a hand that reached for yours when no one else was around. That's the kind of love Jasper and Eleanor grew into, but peace rarely lasts forever. One warm morning, as they prepared to ride into Harmony Creek for supplies, shadow returned, one neither of them had expected to face again. A rider, the same, one who had come months before, demanding Jasper answer for the past. This time he came alone again, but with a different expression, something colder, less confrontational, more calculated. He dismounted slowly and walked toward the cabin, eyeing Eleanor with disdain. "Still here," he said to Jasper, who had already stepped in front of her. "This is my home now." Jasper replied, "That's a bold claim." The man sneered, "Especially for someone with blood still drying in another town." Jasper's hands were steady, but Eleanor could sense the tension. "You got no right to stir up trouble here," he said, stepping forward. "I've got every right," The man spat. I lost a brother that night. Okay? Whether you threw the punch or not, you ran. That makes you guilty. I defended myself, Jasper said firmly. I never meant for anyone to die. Okay, but I'm not running anymore. The man's hand went to his gun, but he hesitated. Eleanor's rifle was already in her grip. This is our land, Key said, voice calm but hard as iron. He's under my protection. You try anything here, you answer to both of us. The standoff felt eternal, the prairie itself holding its breath. Then, with a grunt of disgust, the man stepped back. This isn't over, but they both knew it was. Maybe not legally, maybe not in some courtroom miles away, but here, on this patch of earth, justice had already been done. Justice doesn't always come in the form of a badge or a judge. Sometimes it's a woman standing beside the man the world cast aside, choosing trust over fear, love over gossip, and peace over revenge. As the writer left, Eleanor turned to Jasper. He'll spread more rumors, she said. Let him. Jasper answered. People will believe what they want. But we'll still be here. We'll keep building. And that's what they did. They kept building. Together, they planted new crops. They adopted a stray dog that wouldn't leave the barn. They even added a room to the cabin, just in case the future held more than two. When they went to Harmony Creek, they went hand in hand. The stairs didn't stop, but they no longer mattered. Eleanor, once the grieving widow no one dared to speak to, now carried herself with quiet certainty. She had made her choice, and she stood by it. And Jasper, he carried himself differently, too. No longer a hunted man, but a man with roots. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a blaze of gold and orange. Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. Remember the storm? She whispered. The night you arrived. Couldn't forget it, he replied, his arm wrapping around her. I thought it might be the end of me. And instead, he said, kissing the top of her hair, it was the beginning. It began as a desperate night under a storm, became something rare, a story of second chances. A wounded man found refuge, not just from the elements, but from his past. A lonely woman found not just company, but courage. And together, they built something greater than either of them expected. A home, not just for walls and a roof, but a space where pain was acknowledged, not hidden, where scars were shared, not shamed, where judgment from others couldn't compete with the truth they built each day with their own hands.